All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Heath Payne. We're at Abbott Claim in Carlton, September 3rd, 2020. Heath, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
First question for you, why wine?
Why wine? Well, I don't think it. That's an interesting question. It's a very simple question, but that's kind of like a big question. I don't know that it ever was wine. I think I know that more today than I've known all along. I think mostly, I really fell into it because for me, I didn't grow up with a wine background. My family did not consume, alcohol or anything like that. I grew up in a family where that just wasn't the thing. And so wine wasn't on the table or anything like that. It wasn't a part of my life. But being outside, exploring the natural world through my own eyes was very important to me growing up. I grew up in a large family, so it's very easy to be imaginative and find your own place. I grew up in a family where I had 5 sisters, so I spent most of my time avoiding my sisters, and so I would just take off and explore. So I think the outdoors were my friend at a very early age, and so I think that was really kind of what led me to just continue exploring, and I enjoyed working part-time jobs. I never really found what I was interested in academically. I dabbled with college here and there, pursuing anthropology and different ideas, but nothing to any great extent, community college based. And I found myself always finding part-time work, whether it was just cleaning up construction sites or working in restaurants or record store or whatever. Just I'd work just long enough to save a few dollars and go hit the road. And so I remember coming back from I was actually hitchhiking around the Southwest with a couple friends, and decided to bail on that trip and come back. Well, first of all, I should say I grew up in northern Arizona. And so having the outdoors be your friend is very easy to do there. I grew up in the high desert, so probably looks more like what people would think of, Bend. That looks more like kind of the terrain that I grew up in. So it wasn't the saguaro cactus that everyone assumes of Arizona. Most of Arizona is actually a lot of wilderness land. So I grew up in that. And so we'd go explore, and I came back and needed to find a job, and there was a small ag town just north of the town that I grew up in, Prescott, Arizona. And that I'm from Prescott because I say Prescott and not Prescott. So there was a small little ag town called Chino Valley just north of Prescott, and there was a certified organic Concord grape grower there, and they had just planted several acres of wine grapes, vinifera. And a friend of a friend of a friend kind of thing, hey, they're looking for someone to help out in the vineyard. And so I was like, great, that sounds like fun. So I went and talked to them, and they were like, this is great because we want our full-time crew to focus on our cash crop, essentially, Concord grapes. And so we've got several acres of these wine grapes we need someone to look after. And so I just kind of was thrown out there and asked a lot of questions. Some of it was figuring it out as I went, read a lot of books, and just really enjoyed that connection to something non-human with the outdoors. It was a way to share the outdoor experience with something else. And it was just, it really spoke to me and my interests. And so I started, is this something you can do academically? Is this something, I was curious enough to actually want to get really analytical about it. And so I started looking at schooling options. I started doing the UC Davis extension program. Wasn't really suited to that style of learning. I like being hands-on in a classroom, that kind of stuff. I like to raise my hand. So I started looking at schools And so Oregon was not necessarily on my radar. Pinot Noir was not on my radar. I started learning about wine while I was working at that first vineyard, just because wine was the ultimate reason I was doing it. It was the end byproduct. And I was, quickly faced with this image of very elite people, a luxury lifestyle, and I didn't relate to that at all. And so I started looking at producers who maybe didn't fit that mold. And I remember watching an early Jancis Robinson wine tasting video, education video, and she was in the Loire Valley, and there was this person, this character, this producer, Didier Dagenau, on there, and his image and his persona, his attitude really just struck me. I was like, whoa, this is not the Bordeaux Chateau that I was sort of led down this path of, and so I started seeking out his wines and trying to find producers that seemed to match my image and someone I could relate to, and therefore maybe I could relate to these wines. And that also sort of correlates with the educational experience I was looking for. I didn't know if ultimately, if the only jobs were in Napa, maybe that's what it looked like. But I had a bunch of friends moving to Oregon at the time, getting out of Arizona and deciding they wanted to go. They were all musicians and artists and stuff like that, and Portland seemed to be the right place. And so I just started, are there schools up there? And sure enough, there was, Walla Walla Community College, Washington State University, Oregon State, and I found Chemeketa Community College had recently opened there what was at that time called the Northwest Viticulture Center. And I said, well, this looks pretty interesting, because it was both academic and real practical in the vineyard, in a teaching winery situation. And so I said, that's it. And I convinced my then girlfriend at the time that, hey, let's go to Oregon. She said, okay, So we packed up and headed north. This was in 2006. And I started school right away. And she was art focused in Arizona, and but had a education. She graduated from the University of Arizona with biology, so she said, well, I'll pay the bills while you're in school. I'll get a job, and so I was able to just focus really closely on my studies, and also find part-time work in trying to get as much experience as possible. So for the first couple of years, I mean, it looked like, pruning in a vineyard, during the winter time, and then I was in this random cellar over here helping out, and then just kind of doing the rounds. It was really great though, because in 2006, right as soon as we got here, I'd started classes, and then that harvest, the harvest of 2006, I actually got an opportunity to go to France, through a friend of a friend, whose family owned a small domain over there called, in southwest France, called Domaine du Petit Pin. And so I said, great, let's do it. And it was another sort of altering experience for me, because it was a family-run domain, and it was not ultra premium wine. It wasn't premium wine. It was wine for the community. And that's one of the things that really stands out culturally to me in France, is how community oriented it is. Local cheeses, local breads, the concept of terroir really extends far beyond wine over there. And getting to spend time, living with this, I lived with them, and so shared the day-to-day with them, and the rhythm of life during that time. We started harvest at midnight, and we worked until around 6 o'clock in the morning, at which point you could take an espresso break or whatever. They don't really eat breakfast. And so somewhere around 7 or 8 o'clock, the local patissiere would come driving through and say, how many baguettes do you need today, or croissants or whatever, and you'd get something if you wanted it. And then towards lunchtime, everyone just shut down operation, went, had a beautiful lunch, and then went and took naps. And I was blown away by that. And then eventually everyone starts to migrate back into the winery, and you work some more, and then it's dinner time, and then you have a wonderful dinner, and then you go to bed for a few hours, and you get up at midnight and you start it all over again. And it was just wonderful rhythm of life. Mm-hmm. And that really appealed to me. And so when I came back, I was really committed to learning more about the industry that I was now in, the Oregon wine industry, and found that there was this similar rhythm, very culturally oriented, very community oriented, and I kind of fell for it. And so from there, I started really exploring what Pinot Noir looked like and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And academically, I was doing viticulture. That was my main focus. Mm-hmm. But I quickly realized that there was more employment opportunities on the winery side. And I was also intrigued by that at that point. So I did both programs at Chemeketa. Mm-hmm. I did the Vineyard management program and the wine production program. And while I was in school, I started interning at Witness Tree Vineyard. Bryce Bagnall had just passed away a few months prior, and it was somewhat serendipitous in the sense that I was familiar with the Witness Tree wines, and when I decided to come to Oregon, I was exploring some of the wines from up here, and Witness Tree was always one of those that really stood out to me. And had learned a lot about Bryce prior to that, and so having the opportunity to come in and work with Stephen Westby not long after that, and alongside Stephen, who is still to this day a big inspiration for me. And so I spent part-time in the vineyard, part-time in the cellar, and then when I graduated from school, I think 2009, they basically promoted me to the cellar master, and I stayed there. So I was there from around 2007, spring of 07, I believe, to the end of harvest of 13. At which point I decided that it was time to see something new. Mm-hmm. And explore other opportunities, and I'd become curious about Washington, and had an opportunity to go out and explore that industry. And I won't say too much about that. I will say that I came back about 8 months later, and it was really because of a very different sense of community, a very different cultural landscape, and I think, well, I'll just say it just lacked the sense of community that the Oregon wine industry has. Mm-hmm. I kind of knew that right away, right as soon as I got there. Here in Oregon, people are very collaborative. It's what's good for one is good for all, kind of, for the most part, feeling. And so there's all these collaborative efforts throughout the industry. Everything from Oregon Pinot Camp, IPNC, which is more of a broader outreach even, and then all these grand networking opportunities, ways that people work together, all the AVAs, and it's just absolutely wonderful here. And I didn't get that sense out there, and everything was fairly proprietary from one winery to the next and whatnot. And so I just really felt the desire to come back, and thankfully my very supportive partner and was like, sure, let's do that. And so we came back, and I explored we moved to Portland. So I spent a couple years exploring the opportunities in what was a very quickly growing Portland urban wine scene. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But once again, it was fascinating being in sort of even another dynamic of the Oregon wine culture, one that was very fast-moving, very social, and very competitive, but also very creative and exploring and pushing boundaries, and really almost in a sort of a punk rock way of kind of pushing back on some of the very routine oriented ideas of a lot of the valley. Mm-hmm. And so that was fascinating, but I also saw its limitations and my frustrations with what I was seeking, I knew at that time that I was still really trying to find a way back to the vineyard. And I was good at the wine side, at the winemaking side. And so I had an opportunity to work for a winery that was then in Portland and then went down to the valley. From there, I remember having another one of those moments of okay, have I seen, is this the end of this road now? What's next? And at that point, you know, I've always been really great colleagues with a lot of the people in the Olamite Hills, and I said, you know, you've really got nothing to lose. Shoot the moon. And so I pulled into Bethel Heights and said, hey, can I work harvest? And they were ecstatic. And that opportunity pushed me beyond where I was, and it became one of the most wonderful collaborative experiences of my life. And to this day is still something I reference, and which, you know, wasn't that long ago. But everyone there, every single person there, from the vineyard crew to the tasting room staff, everywhere, everyone just is so pushing at the very top of their game and day to day, bringing everything they have. And that really stood out to me. And that was that cultural identity that really spoke to me, because everyone was inspiring to each other. There was no seemingly, you know, sure, there's frustrations in any vineyard winery operation, but there was, at the end of the day, it was about what was right and the way to move forward. And so when I rose to the top pretty fast there, with a lot of momentum and a lot of opportunity, and so at that point you reach the point where you kind of then say, what's next? There's sort of a theme going on here in my, you know. And I also realized I wasn't getting any younger. And so when it was time to move on and find what's next, I really was open to possibilities, but something that would carry me into the next phase of my life. I'm not old by any means, but there is no denying the fact that the winery is more or less day to day, at least the cellar, is very much a young man's game. And I wanted to kind of see what else, and I'd always come back to the vineyard. The vineyard was always a source of inspiration for me. It should always be the thing that informs everything that the winery does. And that was part of my frustrations with the Portland wine scene. It was just that vineyards were sort of the grocery store for where you got your supplies. And so I was through a great friend of mine, great colleague, Mimi Castile. She put in a word to the crew here at what was a newly reformed Abbott Claim, and wanted to talk. And Alban and I have known each other for a couple of years, just as colleagues. And I came out, and we just had a wonderful, between Alban and Kristen and myself, we had a wonderful engagement conversation about culture and creativity. And I knew pretty quickly that this wasn't despite everyone's tremendous credentials here, that wasn't the thing that brought everyone together. It was the desire to find a community and a culture of people that could work creatively together and build something new. And that spoke volumes to me. And I think everyone involved here, from Anthony to David to Alban, Kristen, everyone here is really inspired that way. And so that's where I'm at today, is someplace that I'd really like to root in. And having been given the opportunity to take on such a pedigreed vineyard that was originally, established by one of Oregon's most renowned winemakers, and to now work with a new vision and a new way forward is really special. It's a tremendous opportunity, and yeah, so that's where I'm at today.
That's a lot of good stuff there. Thank you. I'm curious, along the way, you talk about the vineyard kind of being what keeps pulling you back and inspiring you forward. I'm curious about, you saw a lot of different vineyards, a lot of different places, a lot of different ways to grow grapes. I'm curious about developing your own kind of personal philosophy towards grape growing and along the way, and what you took away from places that you worked, either in a positive or negative fashion, that kind of formed what you wanted to do going forward.
Yeah, you know, I've been, I've always had it, so I'll say two things. There's two underlying theories that I think I've lived by. One is nothing is what it seems. There's no such thing as universal truth. And the other is just simply being open to experience. And so I can literally say that, like, no matter the experience, be it good or bad, I've always tried to find value in it. And so I think I've taken bits and pieces along the way. And I would say that a lot of the protocol-oriented ideas about acceding to the needs of the season, to do the work, don't just not do the work, don't just ignore it, to do the work. That was something that stood out to me certainly at Witness Tree, but very much so at Bethel Heights. But I'd say that along the way I've developed philosophies, because I'll tell you that academically, when I got out of school, I didn't enjoy wine. I had gotten so technical and so analytical about how things should be done in the vineyard and how things should be done in the winery. I stopped enjoying the day-to-day pleasures and experience of it. And I had to sort of fall in love with it again. And I think that at that point I had, moved on from Witness Tree, decided to see what Washington was about, and then I learned that I recovered from that hangover pretty fast. So I came back, and so I'd say that as far as philosophies along the way, it's really do the work, be open to possibilities and to accede to things. And now where we are at, there is a new generation that's coming up that is referencing both old ideas, but also trying to find ways of quantifying ideas that had yet to be really expressed fully. So I'm not so set in my ways. I am still looking forward to possibilities. And there's a lot of, especially in the world of viticulture, at the end of the day, the work still has to be done. And but I'm finding newer and newer opportunities through increased interests, thankfully, in what's being now called regenerative agriculture. I think in the age that we're in, and in social media and marketing and branding and everything, I think that term has already become diluted. The same way sustainable and natural, and even the term organic has. So I'm really moved and inspired by my colleagues in this industry who are truly pursuing things like that. And that has been, so my philosophy there has really goes from protocol to not, how do you expand that? How do you consider the whole system? When you make one decision, when you have one application, one act to do, is it just about efficiency and protocol? How does it affect the overall system? And that is now my thinking today. Yeah, you have to get to the end of the day. And the work has to get done in that period of time. But I don't enter any one idea lightly. I think about the whole, how it affects the entire thing. And the people who I work with in the vineyard are probably just as frustrated with me with that idea, but I'm thankful that they are still supportive and want to pursue greatness the same way I want to. I don't know if I answered your question.
I think
It's sort of an evolving philosophy, and there's things that have really made definitive marks, and there's things that lessons in the moment, and I mean, I'm a human. I've got plenty of regrets, but I try not to. I try to also see opportunity with those things, and this past year has been, like a big challenge of those ideas. So yeah.
Well, let's talk about this vineyard then in particular. You talked about kind of it has quite a legacy to it.
Yeah.
So tell me about its history and kind of what it looked like when you took it over and what you sort of saw as the way forward.
Yeah. So its history is it's not a very old vineyard. I mean, the oldest vines, I think go back to 2002, but Ken Wright made a name of this place early on, and he collaborated with Anthony and with Dave Gruters, and I think this whole ridge line, the Savannah Ridge, first of all, it's very opposite of what I was used to a lot of, which was in the Yola-Amity Hills. This couldn't be more worlds apart up here, and so it's inspiring in a whole new way, and the pedigree that it's seen, it's been host to a number of Oregon's most renowned wineries. And it's a different quality of fruit. The seasonality of this place is very different. It's very fun in the sense that it's very exposed. The ground dries out very fast. The soils are very consistent. But there's all these underlying currents that really inspire me from day to day. The fact that these soils, go back some 200 million years, that's mind-blowing to me. And so as the vineyard is now, has had a pedigreed history, I see that as a big responsibility, but also see it as an opportunity to take what has the successes of the past and make it even better. And Alban, when he came into this vineyard, which I think was around 2017, would have been his first opportunity here, he initially implemented some pretty obvious thinking, transitioning to organic farming and introducing what is called regenerative practices through a no-till system. And so my coming in has taken that, and while I don't believe certification is a necessary means to an end, I think it is a great opportunity to at least tell people, hey, this is our bare minimum standards. Because as I mentioned before, the ideas, the frustration with some of these ideas becoming diluted is truly a frustration. So I think having that organic certification that we'll now receive by the end of this year will at least give that sort of standard benchmark for these are the bare minimums. And it's a really inspiring space to now, I have the wonderful opportunity to collaborate with other people in the industry to create something, a bigger expression of Abbott Claim beyond just grapes. Having the opportunity to increase habitat, to increase pollinator corridors, to plant other crops, to take the challenges of life right now. And one of the great things that's come about for me in all this is the collaborative nature of it. Everything from how I eat at my own house, how I buy food, who I support. A lot of that's changed for me. I buy as much stuff from local farmers as possible now, and I go out of my way to do so. I'll drive 30 minutes up the road after work just to get 2 dozen eggs, because I believe in what they're doing and I want to support them. And it's those ideas that I've also kind of brought back to Abbott Claim. It was part of the creative process that we talked about at the beginning, collaborating with other farmers to grow other things here. So to me, the future of Abbott Claim, where I want to take it, is not just in grapes, but is in a domain that is where the whole place is celebrated for its diversity and its high level of quality, but also the idea of site resilience and habitat resilience. The Savannah Ridge is called the Savannah Ridge for a reason. At the top it tends to mimic oak savanna. We have oak savanna, we have bramble blackberry, we have a gifted forest at the very top that some people have been able to find truffles in. And we just have really interesting boundaries and edges here that are very inspiring. And I don't want to ignore that anymore. I want to take those ideas and celebrate them and make this it's not just Abbott Claim Vineyard and here's the wines from it. It's Abbott Claim and it's this place in the Willamette Valley. So does that answer your question? It's a bit abstract, but it's also nothing I can put my thumbprint, my finger on today. And this is a journey. I mean, this is really a big process and a journey. And I'm thankful I have the support through collaboration and to pursue it. I think we're at a tremendous point in our industry. What a great opportunity where now we're actually an industry where there's other industries that weave in and out of it and create these great opportunities to further explore our environment. And that's great.
You mentioned the support. I'm curious about that. Obviously, that's you think of a traditional vineyard. You think of filling as much of it as you can with grapes and making as much wine as you can out of it, or selling as many grapes as you can to maximize profits. So tell me about this more holistic approach and selling that to the other people who have to support you here and making sure everyone's on board with it.
No, that's the reality of it. I mean, because there's when you're doing more of a curating like I'm doing right now of a larger property. I don't just have grapes to take care of. I have all of these habitat areas. I have a pond to take care of. I have roads to take care of. I have multiple sites really. Abbott Claim is just really the main ranch. We have one other vineyard that we take care of, and then we're in the process of developing another site in a very fascinating and interesting way. This is down in the Eola Amity Hills. So the collaboration there and how it's supported, there's no denying the fact that you still have to sell something on a piece of paper that has some dollar signs, and it has to translate. And I think the work should always speak for itself. And if it's a failed effort, then that's a big deal. I don't take it lightly, the amount of support that I have. So because of that, I choose to work with experts, to work with people who know more about something than I do. I would say when it comes to soil, what I'm learning today, now is that if you want to be a good grape grower, you should really just study soil. Don't spend your time studying grapes, study soil. And so I have a great opportunity to work with, a great soil biologist. I have opportunities to collaborate with an expanded viticulture team. I have this really great opportunity right now to work with a colleague to diversify cover crops, because that's something she specializes in. And there's what I think in my mind and what but this person has more of a history in understanding native plants and habitat than I do. So being able to sell it on paper, you have to be able to tell a bigger story and see how it fits in with your story and the story here at Abbott Claim. So far, I've been supported in the sense that the things that are exciting to me are also exciting to everyone else. And for right now, it's we can pencil it out.
So tell me about now you're talking about taking over established vineyards, talking about establishing your own project, which I'm going to ask you about more in a second here. But I'm curious, now that you have this experience with a number of different vineyards, number of different sites. How do you judge a vineyard? What is it you look for when you come into a vineyard for the first time? What is it you see in your head in terms of what needs prioritizing, and how do you judge whether a vineyard is worth your time, worth your while?
Yeah, so I think this kind of does go back to community and culture, and if you respect the people who are tending the vineyard, and you understand that their interests, I think that's a big part of it is relationship and understanding their pursuits. Because we all know that there's limitations to a growing season. There's things you have to do. There's frustrations with farming, so there's that aspect. So there's some areas where you have to be lenient, and other areas where you have to look deeper. Mm-hmm. But I think I look to people first. Mm-hmm. And then when we go into the vineyard, just overall vine health and the floor. Mm-hmm. If anything, I look at the floor more than I do the vines. And of course, once you're into the growing season, you can look at the health of the canopy. Were there missed opportunities? What are they dealing with? If anything, it's almost like you notice what are they dealing with versus what are they succeeding at. Mm-hmm. Because that'll also speak a lot to how they're able to accede to the needs of the vineyard. So I'd say that I look to people first, mm-hmm. and then I look at the floor, and then I look at what the deficiencies are, mm-hmm. Not in a negative tone, mm-hmm. just in a manner of what are we possibly in for the season, kind mm-hmm. of thing. Yeah.
What do you look for in the floor?
Diversity of cover. Is it clean cultivated? Is it I'm not totally opposed to those ideas, but within reason. And how is it being used? Is it just for efficiency? And because if you can go into a site, and I'm sure it'll raise a lot of hairs on people's necks right now making these statements. But if you go into a vineyard and it should in theory be an older established vineyard, and it's clean cultivated, and it's you just have to, and the drip system is still in and whatnot, and maybe they're managing it in a just a more efficiency model. Mm-hmm. Let's get through the season. It's the get her done approach, and that to me is very telling right away. Like, why do you have this? Why are you doing this? If it's just to get to the end of the day, and how deep do these roots go? But also, the bigger thing is, what could the mineralization possibly be like in the soil if this is the way that the ground is being treated? And if the mineralization is not there, and you're not getting the nutrient cycling, and you're just acceding to, it's the idea of eating a balanced diet versus just taking a vitamin for your nutrition. You can tell pretty easy when you go into a vineyard what's happening there. And so if it's the vitamin approach, I can't help but just make the assumption that nutrient cycling is low, and therefore mineralization is low, and therefore mineral uptake into the vines is low. And so I would just have a hard time thinking that there would be any more than a primary characteristic out of that vineyard. Mm-hmm. But that's about as biased judgment as one could get. I mean, I'm very aware of that, but that's my experience. Mm-hmm. So I'd say people and the floor are the first two things that I look at going into a vineyard.
Mm-hmm. You talked about getting the site organic certified. Mm-hmm. Tell me about how you define organic farming, what it means to you, organic farming.
Yeah, so if anything, organic farming, in my perspective, the first farm I worked for, as I mentioned back in Arizona, their cash crop was certified organic grapes, but then they also had a market garden. They also had just these bigger systems in place, and they actually had more of a whole systems approach there. They were certified through CCOF. But they had a pond that they kept fish in, and then the fish regenerated the water that would then be used. They would do flood irrigation mm-hmm. because of just where they were in the valley. It was valley floor. And so then that water would go through, and it was the aspect was very gentle, but it would collect on the other end, and then they would have it pumped back into the pond, into the pond, and it was this very regenerative system. The family also grew everything that they ate on site. They had the market garden, they had the farm store, and then they also enjoyed the pond for swimming in during the summertime. It was just this bigger whole farm system, because you can still walk into organic vineyards, organic farms, certified farms and vineyards, and it just, you can still get this sort of scorched earth sense of farming where they rely too heavily on certain things. And they're not necessarily acceding to the needs of the farm, just the needs of a certification. And so I say I define it a little bit differently. I'm happy to have the certification because, like I said, I think it gives the model, the bare minimum of what we're doing. I will do what it takes to meet that, but then I'm going to do beyond that. So organic farming to me really looks, I think, probably something similar to what I think a lot of people would call biodynamic farming and regenerative systems. I mean biodynamics, I think, allowed people to experience the regenerative model in a vineyard setting, because I think a lot of the applications of regenerative farming actually have limited application in the vineyard. But when you take it through the interpretation of biodynamics, I think you start to get closer to your needs. So I'd say that as far as organic farming, that's what organic farming really looks like to me. As I said, we'll use the certification so that consumers and people can know here's the bare minimum of what we're doing. But I think the bigger farm system will speak for itself. And that goes back to what I was saying, just I think your work has to speak for itself. If you're willing to put the cork in that bottle of wine and put it in front of someone, you have to answer for everything there. And I feel the same way here. So,
do you feel that that's an increased consumer expectation? Do you feel that people are pushing forth more of that in their wine?
I don't believe there's any market studies that really say organic certification gives you $10 more a bottle. I don't think there's anything that proves that. But I think if it's a conversation I want to have, then I need to curate that. We need to curate that. So I don't know that it is the perception and the interests are totally there yet. But if I can help curate that conversation, then that's a great way to do it.
I know one of the things when we hear about organic farming is that it reduces the tools in your toolbox. It leaves you fewer kind of standard farming practices that to defend your vineyard or to protect your vineyard. So tell me about learning that and how you've kind of developed your new tools in the organic system, and what changes in the kind of year-to-year, day-to-day farming practices for you to keep a healthy organic vineyard.
Yeah. So it's interesting because there's a great argument to be made about, what's more sustainable, 3 vineyard passes with sulfur or 1 vineyard pass with something non-organic. Compaction of soil, carbon, all these things kind of play into that. You could argue both sides, up one side and down the other. A lot of it does come back to the soil for me, and how the plant responds to certain things. That's a big part of my efforts here, is just in soil management. So I do know that with those limited resources, well, first of all, I'd say that there's a lot more resources becoming available if you're willing to look for them. If you're, like I said, if you're just getting the piece of paper of like, okay, here's your organic spray program for the year, get her done, well, then you're probably going to feel the limitations more than taking the time. And it's exciting for someone like me to find out other opportunities and other ways of looking at things. Biodynamics really helps that. Broadens things. I'd say that part of the reason our canopy looks so great this time of the year, we're into September now, and things are still really green out there, despite the heat that we're getting right now. The canopy's still, they're looking a little tired, but for the most part, they look really great. And I think part of that is because of We got rainfall late into the season. We still did the season with much lower rainfall, annual rainfall than average, whatever that is anymore. But we got little bits, all the way up and through July, and so I think that helped. But I think also working with the biodynamic teas helps us alleviate some stress, and it's that idea of homeopathics, where you get to start to work with the vine to sort of trigger subtle reactions that have a bigger impact. And I think when you start to acknowledge that you can work in very subtle ways, you don't just have to get all of your foliar nutrition out in 2 passes. You can spread it out in smaller increments, and it's as if the vine's getting a meal, and you can look at the opportunities you have with soil to increase nutrient cycling through increasing the soil microbial diversity through compost teas on the ground. I think the toolbox just gets even bigger, because when you're doing it the other way, like I said, you can argue, I think really the soil compaction and the carbon inputs are the biggest argument there. But it's certainly not as fun, certainly not as interesting. And I don't know that in the end, 10 years, 20 years down the road, it'll still yield the same results. I want this site to be very strong, and I don't see conventional farming as getting us there. I want this to be a strong site decades from now. And I don't see conventional farming getting us. If anything, I'm seeing the repercussions of it, of that logic. And so I've learned from in the past, one of the great things that Ted Castile and Mimi Castile did at Bethel Heights, most of that vineyard is old vines from the late 70s. And one of the things that they did is, instead of combating phylloxera, spraying a systemic or ripping out, replanting, doing all these things, they saw regenerative farming as an opportunity to potentially slow the spread of phylloxera. And that's why they went into a no-till system. And as a result, those vines are still producing pretty heavy today, and producing very expressive wines. And so I'd say that just because you have a smaller toolbox, well, first of all, I would say no, the toolbox isn't smaller. I'd say it's bigger. And second of all, I think learning when to react and when not to react is important. I've done a lot of observation this year at this site, and there's times when I can look back at this year and say there were some missed opportunities, and I'm excited about hopefully not making those same mistakes next year. But also the philosophy I had at the beginning of the growing season and my intentions at the beginning of the growing season have evolved. And as such, the practices both in the vineyard and on the floor have evolved as the season has gone on. I think having those philosophies and those goals in mind give you something to work towards. But I'd say that, circling back around in this very long explanation, I think the toolbox is actually bigger. Yeah.
It's a great explanation, by the way. You mentioned seeing the effects of long-term conventional farming. Tell me more about that. What do you see in a vineyard that's been conventionally farmed for some years?
Well, I'm speculating.
Okay.
I'm speculating because we do deal with red blotch. And, there's been so much research over the years, and a lot of it's still going back to, vectors and whatnot. And then the research that's now been coming out on how to manage it, how to live with it, it's all goes back to the okay, here's the same answer for everything, just fertilize and irrigate everything, and you'll get a greater canopy mass to then, offset the ripening deficiencies. And I was like, there's something more here. And so I think we're seeing depleted soils. Because we're seeing depleted soils, we're seeing very low microbial soil, just soil biology in general. The fact that anything's growing right now means there's soil biology. There's something happening there. It exists. But can the populations be in greater numbers? And can they, if they're in greater numbers, greater diversity, then can I also then have just a broader spectrum of nutrient cycling, nutritional availability. So I think we're seeing on not just the vineyard scale, I think we're seeing repercussions to more conventional ways of farming, industrial agriculture and the repercussions of it. I mean, think about industrial agriculture. It's pretty new when you consider the existence of human species. We've been around a long time. We've lived with viruses a long time. I think I had read somewhere that I think it's upwards of 43% of human DNA is viral, because the human species has existed with it for so long. Mm-hmm. And that speaks to multiple systems of life. And so when I think about land and soil and what's there and what's not there, that's, I think, where I start to see these increased diseases that we're seeing on the agricultural side are the same that we're seeing on, life above the ground. Mm-hmm. And I think it's pointing fingers, and I don't have the answers and I don't have the explanations, but I think we need to rethink those ideas. Did I answer your question? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What you're talking about seems fairly revolutionary in terms of agriculture. It seems very, very new, and yet we hear it a lot in Oregon, or at least we've heard it a lot in Oregon the last few years. I'm curious about your, as you've developed these thoughts and as you've sort of grown into your role in the industry, how have you seen the industry itself evolve with agricultural practices?
Yeah, I think we're at a tremendous. I feel like we've been, this past year, we've been held down by the great holdup, but I think that has also spearheaded a lot of intention on the farming side. And because we have all of these as an actual industry, what helps define an industry is the fact that you've opened up to other industries. Mm-hmm. And the fact that now we can collaborate with a lot of other industries, mm-hmm. Where more sustainable forms of farming are being tried in their farm systems. This is a monocrop out here. These are grapes, and I want to change that so I can look to other farmers who are more diversified. Mm-hmm. And I think there's tons of opportunity. I think there's a lot of momentum in the wine industry, in the Oregon wine industry. We've always attempted to set an example for quality here, in my opinion. And that goes all the way back to the early days of, David Lett and colleagues. And I think that momentum is still very much present. And I think it's just really, that should be conventional. That should be the standard thinking. Mm-hmm. That should be the standard model. And I think we have opportunities to do that. The fact that some, certifying agencies that were initially resistant to calling out herbicides are now coming back and saying, hey, we should reconsider these things. I think as an industry, we're finding the opportunities to say we need to set a better and higher standard. If we want to be here in 50 years, we need to do the work today. Mm-hmm. I think there's enough like-minded people in this area that we can do that. We can push for this. I'm gonna stay on that positive note with that. Like I'm sure there's a lot of people who would argue, and I do know colleagues who have vineyards, and they're just, if they could, they would just dump herbicide all over it, But I don't look to them for inspiration. So I'm happy to drink a beer with them later on down the road. But you have to stand by your work.
So you mentioned you took the winemaking path for a little while as well. You worked in the cellar a bit as well. Tell me about, I know there's a couple little labels that came out of that. Tell me about your own winemaking background and the labels you've created, and what, if anything, is going on with them at the moment.
Yeah. Well, like any cellar rat, you get anxious pretty quick to have your two barrels. And so I was thankful early on that I had that opportunity to tinker and explore, and you realize one barrel is 23 cases, and holy cow, what should I do with this? And it was a great way to explore technique. And I started some of these things back when I was in school and still learning. And so I was doing very traditional approaches. And it was great because it expands your opportunity to, I think my background in being able to work with commercial yeasts helps me be more comfortable and better understand wild flora, and working with more native yeast fermentations and secondary fermentations, things like that. So the early label, my first label was a label called Peasant's Harvest, which really just kind of spoke exactly to what it was. I gleaned fruit from the Chemeketa Vineyard, actually. I came in and grabbed grabbed some Pinot Blanc and some Tempranillo for some Rosé, and it was fun. But the fun became real pretty quick when, I need to do something with this. And so it was the put them in a backpack and go walk into restaurants. And I was thankful that the response was very supported. And so it just gave me that on-the-ground experience of making the wine, walking in the door, selling it, having those relationships with the buyers and the bartenders and whatnot, and certain people really championing. I wasn't making enough wine that I needed to spread it around everywhere. I just needed those couple of champions. And then as my boss, as that production increased a little bit, I learned a really great lesson one year. It was 2009, and big yield, lots of grapes that year. And I remember I won't give specific names, but I had shared a contract with Tom Gary down at Kristen. So we'd shared a contract at another vineyard that was south of the Yola Hills. And I was thinking, okay, third leaf fruit, if they manage it the way we manage it at Witness Tree, it would see like one cluster per plant. I just had that in my head. And so I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll sign on to that 2-acre contract right there. Because this year we'll get this amount of tonnage out of it. Next year will be this amount. It'll grow, incrementally. And visited, I remember after fruit set, I got there, was visiting the site, and I was like, holy cow, there is a lot of fruit here. And we needed to, do some thinning and whatnot. And the grower was like, well, this is a balanced crop for this. And I'm like, this is a lot of fruit for a young vine. So anyways, I trust, he was very talented, very skilled grower. And come harvest time. And what I thought was going to be more like 1.5 tons, 3/4 ton off of each, and then sharing it. Hey, 5 tons is on your way. And I wasn't prepared for that. Now 5 tons is a drop in a bucket. But back then it was like, oh my God, I need to have a talk with Jenny, because we were paying for this out of our pockets. And so I learned very quickly the value of acreage contracts and, making sure that things fit both sides, both parties. And thankfully the grower was very understanding and worked with me to get it paid off. But that moment made me think, okay, my employer at the time was like, yeah, it's a lot of Pinot Noir you're bringing in the door there, so maybe reconsider some of these things. And so that was the start of me getting curious about Washington. And so I started looking at opportunities in Washington, and I'd been wanting to create a label that was a little bit more sort of provocative and edgy. I really was, once again, have continued to be inspired by the Dagenham wines, and the Dagenham wines always had these labels that were not so definitive. They were more abstract, and celebrations. And so I wanted something that was a little bit provocative. So I just started my namesake label, which was just Payne wine. And I had these really sort of dark images, a wolf's head with a skull on it and everything like that. And I was working with Rhone varieties out of Washington and worked with some really great people and some really fun sites. And that project kept growing and growing and became very real very fast. So I had to find a distributor, and you learn pretty quickly like what sells, what doesn't sell, and your competition. Where I was an Oregon winemaker making Washington wines, but not like Washington. They were very acid driven, very fresh, And so they were just so, like, you had to hand sell everything. You had to explain everything. What does the label means? How come your Syrah doesn't taste like this Syrah and stuff like that? And it just became really grueling to have to like explain everything. But one of the things that I was really successful with was the one label I had that was for the rosé. It was called Little Wing. And all of the artwork was done by a friend of mine who I am still great friends with. He's one of my best friends to this day. We talk pretty much every day, and we grew up skateboarding together and whatnot. He lives in Portland. He's a great artist. And so he did all the labels and did these wonderful labels for Little Wing. And that wine really took off to the point to where everyone wanted it. And year after year, hey, when is this going to come out? Can we make sure we get an allocation of it? And so that became something that I was like, well, this is interesting. And so I basically abandoned the rest of the portfolio and just focused on this one label and turned that into its own label, just called Little Wing. Mm-hmm. And thankfully have a really great lawyer who helped me get Oregon trademark on it. And their wines are not distributed out of state, so I can't get a national trademark. But we reached out to the Hendricks estate and got their thumbs up.
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah. So we're the only people who have officially gotten the thumbs up from the Hendricks estate regarding using that name. So that's worked out well, and it's just kind of kept going over the years, and it's grown into its own. Now it's three categories: rosé, a red, and a white. Mm-hmm. And it's really a label that I've now sort of, my distributor, I'm in one of those really fortunate situations where they just, we work together very closely on it in terms of prior to the season, how much is they want, and we work on it together basically. Mm-hmm. So I'm able to contract everything. So it is at this point very virtual. I don't want it to interfere with with this path here. Mm-hmm. So it is a very virtual project that has taken on a life of its own, and we'll see where it ends up. I'd say that this project here is more important to me personally, but I know that Little Wing now has a place in the world. Mm-hmm. And now has a place in the Oregon wine industry. It's about 1,000 cases now that's all sold pretty much in Portland, Eugene, and Salem. So I don't think it should just disappear. Mm-hmm. But that's where it's at today. Is it's a virtual thing, and we'll see what happens with it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Tell me about setting up a virtual wine label like that. Tell me, finding the grapes, finding the space, finding the time. Tell me about how it works for you in terms of fitting it in with your day job.
Yeah. So where it was at the very beginning when I was working for other wineries, you had to negotiate those things. You really had to, during harvest time, it was, okay, I'm done here. My work's finally done. The floors are all mopped up and everything, and you've done everything you needed to for them. And then you're walking over to your space where you're sharing with another buddy, and you're walking in that door at midnight, and you've got X amount of tons of grapes sitting there waiting for you to process. So it's really laborious. And so I switched it to the more virtual model because of that. It was, as far as personal life goes, the title of Harvest Widow is there for a reason. And once I had a family, once my son was born and everything like that, it just this time of year, where you're gone a lot is really makes it even that much more difficult. Mm-hmm. And so the frustrations that also come with shared spaces and whatnot. Is this person paying their bills, or they're not paying their bills? Are you? There's a lot of limitations there for what me also working and trying to run this. I think if I was just all in on my project, I could accede to that better. Mm-hmm. But the way I saw to accede to it was, one, I was about ready to abandon it and just focus on work. And my distributor basically talked me out of that. And so I had to find another solution. And fortunately, one of the wineries I was working for was a mover and a shaker. They had fruit coming in-house, they had stuff they were contracting, they were doing cider project over here, they were doing a lot of things. And so I think one of the things I learned from that was how to operate these multi-tiers and different labels and different brands. And so that's the point where I said, well, I can do this on a virtual scale. And started reaching out to the colleagues I was familiar with, who I was already working with, and said, hey, can we do these things? And yeah, let's do it. So it developed pretty organically. That wasn't the business plan from day one. I'll be honest, there wasn't a business plan. It was the typical seller I bought half a ton this year, I'm buying a ton next year, I'm doubling, you just do that kind of stuff. But that's how it evolved organically. And yeah, I've made plenty of mistakes along the way and have had plenty of financial woes with that. But now it's at a point to where it's by and large, it pays, it's cyclical, it pays itself. It doesn't pay me anything, but it takes care of itself. I don't have to put any more money in necessarily. Yeah.
You talked about your kind of what's what I'm looking for here? Sorry, try this one more time. You talked about the kind of evolution of your philosophy in the vineyard. I'm curious about on the winemaking side. Obviously, a lot of people who start making wine in the cellars make it because they have a vision in their head for something they're not able to do in their day job. They want to try something different, different varietal, different style. So tell me about that. When you started it versus to now, what is the philosophy behind Little Wing? What are you trying to express?
I'd say that if there is a motto for that wine, it is really just celebrate the little things in life that eventually lead you soaring to great heights. That's the idea, that's the concept there. And so it is really all about freshness and wine as a daily table, as a part of food, as a part of the daily table. They're really just wines that are meant to be enjoyed and celebrated and pleasurable. And I don't want to say don't overthink it, but yeah, overthink it, celebrate it. And that's what I try to do there, is I try to make sure the wines are fun and fresh. And I'm not trying to define a sense of place. If anything, they're arbitrarily Oregon, in that sense. But from year to year, the grapes may or may not come from the Willamette Valley or something like that. So stylistically, I just try to make them fresh and approachable, very food friendly, and at a price point that is always approachable. But also, I believe in the whole experience. I don't think it's just put a cork in it, don't put a cork, all that kind of stuff. I like the way, I like the idea of the whole package deal. Something beautiful that you get to hold, you found it on the shelf, you get to pick it out, you get to acknowledge the fact that people buy wine by the label. I still do that. If something's curious enough to me, I'm still going to pick it up and read about it on the back. And if it's curious to me even further, then I'll take it. So I want that experience, and I want it to sit on a table and still look pretty. There's a lot of ugly wine labels out there, horrible wine labels out there, and for whatever reason, and to put that on. In the age of all the media and the access to images and things like that we have these days, you'd think it'd be different. But I just like the idea of something really pretty being on the table. And if you paid $10 for it or $200 for it, I just think it should be a pleasurable experience through and through, both visually, sensorially, physically, and then just the wine itself.
I'm curious about taking your first wine to market. What was the experience like for you?
Scary. I was already doing a little bit of hand selling for Witness Tree, because at that time Witness Tree was self-distributed in Oregon. So I was already times of the year when the cellar was quiet, when the vineyard was relatively quiet, winter time. I would schlep a bag some days and just throw wines in my bag and head up to Portland. And so Stephen introduced me to a lot of restaurateurs and really great people. And you just get more used to the idea of just walking into some place and, hey, can I show you some wines? You know, you learn all the nuanced personality. There's a lot of interesting personalities in the Oregon wine industry. There's even bigger personalities in the restaurant industry. And you learn some of those people, and some of those doors you go back through, and and you just endure the punishment. And then some of those doors, you make really good relationships and really good friends. I'd say it was scary at first. But what's scarier is looking at a pile of wine that doesn't sell, and so you get pretty motivated pretty fast. So I think once you do it for a couple of times, and then you just kind of get used to it, and some days you come home with big success, and that beer tastes really good at the end of the day, and then some days you come home and you are like, oh my God, how am I gonna do this kind of thing. But I definitely think that builds character, but builds endurance is what it does. And so yeah, scary, but I'm really happy I did it.
Did you find that the Portland scene was receptive to tiny labels, to people who maybe with not a lot of name brand recognition,
Yeah.
that they were willing to give you a chance?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I think more so once that sort of new wave of restaurants came about. I think there's some lists that have always been pretty exclusive to crack into. Even some of my favorite restaurants in Portland are still that way, but because they know what they want, and they're trying to curate certain things. I think we're coming back around to that too, where we're seeing some exclusivity. Where prior to all this, prior to COVID, we were seeing some of that exclusivity. Is it natural? Does it fit into these certain categories and whatnot? By what definition? And so I'd say that it got really, really open and supportive very quickly. And I think prior to COVID, I think things were getting a little bit more exclusive. But that idea of expansion and contraction, and I think we're in another one of those. By default, we're very much in a contraction period. And on the other side of it, however long down the road that is, I'm hoping for a really nice big breath of fresh air, and for just a big inhaling, into the lungs. It'll feel really, really great. So I think that the restaurant industry has experienced that same sort of thing, where 1 minute there's a lot of excitement and a lot of inclusion, and the next minute it's getting shut down. So there's also just a lot of competition out there, lots. I mean, I'm one of many, many, many cellar rats who have their label, started their labels, and I look at shelves, these days, and I'm like, what is that? You look at the attendees of OPC, and you're like, who is that? And you look at, it's just there's labels right and left, and everyone's fighting for that spot.
Well, since we're talking about COVID, we might as well talk about COVID.
Sure.
It's September of 2020.
I hear it's popular.
It's a popular thing to talk about. September 2020, and we're still dealing with the effects of it months in. Now, I'm curious, you've talked a little bit about it, but sort of overall, how has it kind of affected your wine life, your life in general? And how have you adapted? And as you look ahead, what are you seeing for dealing with it in the future and kind of coming out of it?
Yeah, I think for me, I spoke to this a little bit earlier. It has opened me up to the way forward being more of a collaborative way forward. So the way I live my life, the relationships in my household, I have a tremendously, incredibly supportive family, my son, my wife, supportive friends through all of this. You see the friends who come back every single day and want to talk and whatnot, and you then to outside my house to my neighborhood, and I'm really thankful that I live in such a great community like McMinnville, and how that community interacts on a day-to-day basis, and supports. There's a lot of local economy there. There is tremendous support on my street. There's tremendous support from my son's school, a very collaborative way, and it makes me want to collaborate with them. It makes me want to do my part and not just be the parent who once upon a time sent their kid out the door to go to school. I want to be a part of that process. And then from outside of that, as I mentioned, I started working closer with local farms to access everything from protein to just produce to ways of getting out of the house. To be honest, one of my favorite places to go with my family, it was to a farm up the road called Tabula Rasa, which is a permaculture operation, pasture-raised pork and Scottish Highland cattle and things like that, and a wonderful, wonderful place that's still expanding, and the things that they're doing there are really inspiring, and I'm finding ways of collaborating with them, both here, and they're finding ways of collaborating, there. So you start these relationships where you suddenly we don't have to do this alone, and that's really been the big thing for me is I don't want to feel alone in this, and we've all initially felt very alone. And I knew that more friendships and more collaboration was the way forward. That's what I was inspired to. And so I pushed for that in my personal life, and I pushed for that here at Abbott Claim. And that's a big part of it. And I think that speaks to the bigger questions we're having politically and socially as well. And things that we're being forced to address in a very real way, in a very necessary way. And I think collaboration is a part of all of that. I don't think we all just take our slap on the hands and bow, put our heads down until it's safe to look up. I think we can find peace of mind in all of this, and we can, the idea of normal, going back to normal, of a new normal, I don't want normal to be a part of my vocabulary anymore. I want to move forward. And I want to see what's next. I'm very excited for what's next because it's been a tough year. Yeah.
As you look ahead then for, I'm curious for harvest specifically, and then for kind of moving on, how will things change here at Abbott Claim because of COVID, and how will things kind of change in the industry, just kind of from your perspective?
Yeah.
Starting with harvest in 2020.
Yeah, it's something new every single day. Obviously in the vineyard, there's a lot of safety precautions, and you're having to work with less labor so that people can spread out more, making sure everyone's taking care of themselves. I care a lot about people, but I work with a vineyard contractor, and so I'm incredibly thankful for their support this year. What a brutal year to just try to start fresh and hire a brand new crew and everything like that. I'm really thankful that wasn't necessarily the thing that was done. So I'd say in the vineyard, it's people's safety, health, overall health, and happiness. I care about people emotionally and want them to feel comfortable, but the work still has to get done. So there's been some setbacks, some frustrations, some big learning curves for me. And so I'm thankful that the people who did it well early on were able to accede to adapting systems. The biggest setback for me that's been frustrating is just not getting to cultural practices as timely as I would like to have. And then we had a really low bloom, low fertility, so poor fruit set, uneven ripening, but clusters are really small. The berries are really small. And for what we do here at Abbott Claim, that's going to be really exciting. But as we enter the harvest period, logistically, it's very interesting. So I've had to look closer at things like more mechanized systems, and trying to pencil them out. It's when I pencil them out, it still doesn't translate based on the yields and the quality that we go for here. It doesn't necessarily make it any more cost efficient to go mechanical, but it does make it a much safer place. But there's some things that just have to be done by hand. So learning what we can, how we can accede to the different needs of how these grapes are going to come off. I do have clients here as well as fruit that comes in-house, acceding to their needs, both qualitatively and also acceding to the crew's needs. And so we'll be working with smaller crews. Man, gone are the days of 10 people running at one picking bin to dump their buckets and trying to do all the, it's going to look very different this year. And the frustration that the crews are going to have because of that, because it's going to limit their ability to make money. That's a big deal. It's going to limit how fast they can, get a job done, which is going to cause a lot of stress for winemakers, for grape growers and everything. And it's going to be very interesting. In the winery, once again, very interesting. Separating people, face shields, lots of protection. How do you create that social, jovial nature that is harvest, that is that energy, that buzz in the air? I think we can still do it. I think we just have to get comfortable with certain things. It's taken a long time to get used to emotionally and psychologically going down, going into any place and just seeing everyone's faces covered up. I was in Roth's a month or so ago, and I saw Marcus Goodfellow, and we both stared at each other for a quick second. I know you, but that's about all we got right now. And it's obviously spending a lot of time at home, doing a lot of home projects, home repairs, and so you go to Lowe's and stuff like that, get supplies, and you see people, and you just look at each other, and you're like, "Are you so and so?" I'm done with that, but I'll be happy when that's not a thing. The emotional, psychological effects of that. But that doesn't mean we can't still sort of have a jovial celebration during harvest. Fewer people, more safer spaces, managing people that way, and working with smaller crews. It's going to take a long time, but I really hope. I still believe in the quality of the vintage. There's no denying that. A drop of wine hasn't been made yet, but I believe we can still make great wine in a vintage like this. Yeah.
Do you think it's, you mentioned kind of the new normal and how people are talking about new normal. Will we return to normal? Will things change? Do you think there are things that are being implemented this year that will stay? Or will it be a rush to get back to previous harvests as soon as possible?
Wow. That's I think systems of efficiency, as long as they actually translated economically and qualitatively, I think those will remain. I think people will see that. And I think that speaks to more than just the wine industry. I think the fact that a lot of businesses have virtualized and are finding some success in that virtual format, there's no reason for them to sign leases on buildings anymore and things like that. So it's, the trickle-down effect is going to be felt for a long time down the road and how it translates. But for here, for I'd say the quality of product we're looking at, the winery is brand new, and so a lot of the equipment inside has yet to really be, this will be its maiden voyage. And I don't want to make a Titanic reference, but I think there was a lot of thoughtfulness put into the design of this place, and a lot of talent and understanding of what went into the equipment and everything. And I believe this is a facility that could get a lot done with fewer people. I think those methods are in place. And I think that is the way forward. I think operations are going to be looking at, whether they're large winery operations or large vineyard operations, they're going to be looking more to minimizing the amount of actual people and labor they need to have there. This has created a lot of opportunity for that. To even the way you look at equipment, vineyard equipment, there's some, I trialed a machine earlier this year that I was familiar with previous vineyards that, both does undervine weeding and desuckers at the same time. I'm like, wow, if you had that on the front and then had a mower on the back, you could get really 3 passes all at once. That's pretty ambitious. But at the same time, it's that thinking. How can I really take qualitative and efficient ideas and measure them out and see what lasts. I think for some people it's going to look at a lot of mechanization. For here and what we're pushing for and what we're striving for, and for what we already work with, there's a lot of handheld operations. And so that just means we're going to have to do with fewer people, and it's going to take a longer time.
You mentioned earlier that the fruit set this year are obviously low across the valley, across the state, but you mentioned being excited about it for a particular reason. Tell me what about this fruit set excites you this year?
The skin to juice ratio. If you're someone who's looking for volume, it's just not going to happen. Juice yields are going to be very low. There's just not going to be a lot of wine made from most parts of the Willamette Valley. I can't speak to the rest of Oregon. I know I've visited some sites. I'm like, wow, there's still really healthy looking grapes here, and a lot of them. So I'd say a majority of what I'm hearing around the valley really is similar to what we're seeing here. Smaller clusters, smaller berries, thicker skins, that really great skin to juice ratio. I would throw out references of 2012, maybe 2008, especially even temperature-wise this time of year. And those were great years for Oregon wine. Abbott Claim tends to pack on the tannin. I think that's one of the reasons it stands out on the Savannah Ridge, is the quality of tannin, the phenolic quality here in general. And so this will be a year to really consider those ideas in the winery. We've got a lot of different tools to work with this year, so I think that'll be. It's weird to have to suddenly be in a year where you design a winery and you build it for a certain amount of production, and then suddenly it's like this is going to be like not even half full kind of thing. But eventually. So does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah, it's that greater skin to juice ratio, and really attention to detail in the winery, I think, will lead to, if you're going to approach this year with your protocol-oriented routine, I think this year will be generous for some people with how they approach winemaking, and not so generous for other people in how they approach winemaking. So, yeah.
You mentioned earlier this is not the only site. You have other sites you work with, and you're developing the new site. So tell us about the new project in the Olamite Hills. Yeah.
Well, we own and manage a vineyard just up the road from here. It's still in the Yamhill Carlton AVA, called Oak Springs Vineyard, and that's a relatively young site. But then we also are in the process of developing a really exciting new project, or I would say project. It's a vineyard right now. It's about 164 acres in the Olamite Hills. It's directly across from Temperance Hill, and it's set back in. So from Bethel Heights Road, you really just see a farmhouse and a pond and some pasture and some oak woodland. And if you drive back in, it suddenly opens up into this very wild, very steep expanse. And I think we start out right around that at the lowest elevation. You're 350 to 400, and then we get well above 1,000 feet at the top. And we'll be developing it in at least two phases. The first phase is we're pretty much in layout design mode right now, and that's been an exciting process. What a privilege to be back in the hills, the Eola Hills, and to be working on that particular hillside, the western side really of the Eola Hills, which has largely, not many people have been in that neighborhood. The Castiles, what was O'Connor Vineyard, there's some Temperance Hill. Those were really the first pioneers on that side. I'm probably forgetting someone. I'm sure they'll mention it to me at some point. But that side of the Eola Hills has not been approached for very long, because it's very steep. And there's a lot of sand over there, and so that site really is that great. On the western side of the Eola Hills, you get that sausage grinder effect of the volcanic soils and the sedimentary soils. So down at the bottom, we are ancient marine sandstone, and as you go up, it starts to just kind of twist and turn, where you've got fossils intermingling with volcanic material, and then as you get up, it gets very rocky, very fast, very steep. It's just a really exciting site. And going in there, the first day I went in there, you see deer. Was a cougar caught on a trail camera. It's wild. It's very wild, and you just see this opportunity for both habitat, but also for vineyard. I mean, at the end of the day, that's the task at hand. I have to get this done. That's the job. That's why we bought this. So how do I do it thoughtfully? And I have this idea of just, can I do this differently than anyone else has done so far? Not in the sense that what everyone else did was wrong. I certainly don't believe that. It's the talents of those people that I'm relying on to get this done. But can I develop a vineyard in a more sustainable and thoughtful way, so that instead of like doing all the damage and then trying to like, build back in systems, how can I keep those systems in place? And so we're developing it in a very interesting way with our partner or with our vineyard developer. And thankfully they're very open to, they're very inspired by the site as well. And they like the idea that if this is what we want to do, and we're willing to put the money into it, then we can do some of these things. And that's really it. I mean, it's really an exciting site. It's a lot of interesting aspects. There's some northern facing stuff, there's western, there's all kinds of different aspects, and a lot of opportunity for different terrain. So the first phase of it is primarily Pinot Noir, and that'll be everything below, say 900 feet will be Pinot Noir, then everything above will be all Chardonnay. And that'll be phase 2. We do have a lease there right now with a Christmas tree grower, so once those trees are out, we'll come in and do the work that needs to be done there. I really see, it is one site, but I almost see 3 or 4 completely separate vineyards in that site. There's just so much, it's so dynamic. And the office views are not bad. I mean, you really feel like you're planting a vineyard on top of the world. I mean, I look right, people talk about the Van Duzer corridor. That's my office window there. It is, not just somewhere out there is the Van Duzer corridor. It is like, like right there in your face. So maybe there will be some fun Pinot Camp seminars at that place too.
So you got a lot going on. So tell me tell me about the future for yourself, the future for the projects, for the various Abbott Claim and et cetera projects. What do you see as you look down the road for yourself and for the projects?
I'm really excited about curating land in that sense and overseeing. It's really almost, there's all these different systems at play, and that's what I'm really excited about. And I really want to build in those systems to where I can manage each site to its needs and not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. And to build in that support network that allows me to do that. Because I see right now the potential for 3 Grand Cru properties, and I don't take that lightly. And that's really, it's a day-to-day process, and I'm excited about the day-to-day. Like, I'm excited to come to work every single day, and I'm excited about the people I get to work with. Yeah, there's some days that are more frustrating than others. So I'd say as far as the future goes, I have to take it day by day. I'm hesitant to kind of create some image in my head of what that looks like, other than I'll know it when I get there. It's like I said, I think at the beginning of the interview, like, I don't know that it's ever been wine, but it is certainly a tremendous translator of experience and land, and the interaction. I don't want to over anthropomorphize the grapevine, because it's so easy to do, but I just like that interaction, that engagement with the land as a whole. And I want that to be celebrated in the way it comes through in the grapes. So I think that's the future. It's a bit abstract, but it's day to day. It really is. Yeah.
Aren't we all right now?
Yeah, right.
What about for the industry in general? What do you see as you look ahead for Oregon wine on a larger scale?
I don't think it's going anywhere. I mean, I think it's here to stay. I think it's even more interesting to people. I think the unfortunate ordeals of our colleagues to the south and what they seem to endure yearly now, and it's just devastating. But I think that also makes heading north a bit more attractive to some of these people. And Oregon has always been a very welcoming industry. And with the amount of interest that's come in, the outside interest that's come in, especially over the past decade, there's probably been a bit more conversations and whatnot about whether that's good or bad. I think it's been good. I think it's really broadened the exposure of Oregon wine, and I think we I think that it will be a part of the daily conversation of wine for people at some point in the future. I think it's here to stay. I think it's going to grow. I think we need to be concerned about habitat resilience, site resilience, water, making sure that we're not just a sustainable wine industry, but we're a sustainable region. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be where a lot of the work needs to be done. That might actually mean limiting some of these operations. It's easy. That's an easy one for me to say because we've got vineyards and everything like that. Who are you to say I can't do something? But I think we, as an industry, we have to think about not just our own personal needs, but we have to think about the region and how sustainable is that. Because we have to support diversified agriculture. The struggles that they're having in Central Oregon right now with the people trying to grow the food for everyone in the region don't have water anymore. But, the towns and cities just around it have plenty of water to water their lawns. Mm-hmm. So I don't want that to be a thing here. I think we need to take care of agriculture, and I think that extends beyond vineyards. Mm-hmm. And it needs to be a sustainable part of community. And from that, I think the communities in the region need to be more supportive of agriculture in the region too. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a bigger idea. I think Oregon wine industry is here to stay. But I think we need to have conversations beyond just our industry. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. You talked about from both your own personal experience and from kind of general experience, the welcoming nature, the collaborative nature of the industry here, especially welcoming new people into it. I'm curious if that has changed at all, or if you could foresee that changing if there were a massive influx of outsiders to the industry. I
think Oregon in general, or at least west of the Cascades, and maybe I'll even scale that thinking down a little bit more. I'd say the northwestern part of west of the this hub of maybe you can even expand that because there's really amazing things happening in Southern Oregon too. But I'd say wine regions throughout, from the bottom of Oregon all the way to the top, especially getting up into Portland. And communities it's always been attractive to outdoor recreationalists, to environmentalists, to artists, to musicians, to wine growers, to winemakers, it's always attracted people who want to make a go for themselves. Mm-hmm. It is not the Silicon Valley where you go to join. You go to be a part of a community. You come to Oregon, I think, to be a part of a community. And I think that's always really been a culture here, at least since I've been here. And, and you can reference all kinds of influences there from the really rich music scene that the Northwest, both Washington and Oregon, has celebrated for decades now, to the art movements, to just how creative people are. It draws people who are more, have creative energy about them and just want to explore life that way. So I think it will. Yeah, I think there'll be exclusivity. I think there'll be more inclusion on some levels. It's just going to become more dynamic. There will be more exclusivity, without a doubt. Especially on whatever the other side of this looks like. I think there's going to be a lot of doors closed and a lot of terrain and markets locked down by certain competitors and people with a lot of power and market potential, market opportunity. So I think it'll be both. I think there'll be increased exclusivity, but I think there'll be still a lot. It's always been the nature of it. It's always been the nature of it.
Right. Last question for you. If someone were to come to you asking for your advice on entering the wine industry here in Oregon, what would your words of wisdom to them be?
If you want to do it academically, study agronomy.
To the soil.
Take a viticulture class, sure, but study agronomy. And really, I think the bigger thing that has been a reoccurring theme for me is do the work be open to it. My more humbling lessons I've learned came from me being too arrogant. And you have to have those lessons. Do the work, be willing to do the work. And whether or not you choose to implement that in your philosophy, that work you did, that particular work you did, it's still worth it. Do the work, be open, be collaborative, and you really, it's a forge your own path. There were times where I thought all doors were closed to me, and I realized it was just in my head. I had to just kind of shoot the moon, and so I did, and I pulled into a driveway one day, and that unlocked the door for me that I had shut. So, yeah, there's a lot of people who are willing to help along the way if you're willing to come in and do the work and to be self-motivated. It is an industry where very rarely are you going to just kind of get, walk down the red carpet all the way. You really have to like go off on your own trail and have fun. Yeah.
All right, that's all the questions that I have for you.
Great.
Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover here today that we should have covered?
No, it's been a wonderful interview. I mean, I appreciate you coming out here. It's nice to see someone. And it's a beautiful day. It's not too hot yet. Yeah. And no, thanks for coming out. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing your story, sharing your perspectives, and sharing this beautiful space you get to call a work office here. And
yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure.
We'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
Thanks a lot.
All right, thank you.